Let's solve homework exercise number 1 from section 3.7. It says fill in the blank so that the resulting statement is true. The argument, if P then Q, and then we have given P, therefore we want to know what we can conclude. Okay, this is called direct reasoning and is valid because the if-then statement with premise 1, if P then Q, and premise 2, P, always will imply the conclusion, which is going to be Q. When we do the last line, it's going to be all true, so it's going to be a tautology. Okay? Now, on page 186 of your textbook, there's a list on the text. There's a list of 4 valid and 4 invalid arguments. So if you can match the form to any of these invalids, 4 valids or 4 invalids, if it matches one of the 4 valids, it's valids. If it matches one of the 4 invalids, of course, it's invalid. Okay? So check on page 186 of your textbook. This is the form of one of the valid arguments. So again, we're going to imply, therefore we can conclude Q is a valid argument because premise number 1, if P then Q, and premise number 2 implies the conclusion Q is going to be a tautology if we did the truth table. Okay? Very good. Number 2, again, this is on page 186, this is the contrapositive reasoning. This is one of the 4 valid arguments, and it's called contrapositive reasoning. It is valid, okay, valid, because because we're going to get if P then Q and not Q will always imply not P. That's going to be it's going to end up, the last line is going to be all true, so it's a tautology. So again, we're going to be able to conclude not P, okay? And this is one of the 4 valids, one of the 4 valid forms on page 186 of your textbook, okay? All right, so again, it is one of the valid because premise number 1, if P then Q, and premise number 2, not Q, implies not P. Oh, okay, I forgot to go back here. Yeah, this is not P. So you can, because the contrapositive is logically equivalent to the converse, you know if you got if P then Q, then you can get if not Q, then not P. All right, if the first implies the second implies the third, that's transitive reasoning. Again, this is valid. It's going to be valid. And then again, the 2 premises is you're going to be able to conclude the first implies the third. The P implies R. That's going to be your premise. And again, the tautology is going to be premise number 1, if P then Q, and premise number 2, if Q then R. Those 2 are always going to imply the conclusion, which is if P then R. Okay? All right, so again, on page 186 of the textbook, this is one of the 4 valid arguments. So again, we've got if P then Q, if Q then R, then the first implies the third, then P implies R, and it is valid because if you did if P then Q and if Q then R, the 2 premises will always imply if you do the it will always imply the conclusion. If P, then R. If you do the truth table, the last line will be a tautology. All right, very good. Okay, this is called, if you've got if P or Q and you've got not P, then this is called disjunctive reasoning, and again, it's valid. This is on page 186. This fits one of the 4 valid forms, okay, because it's a tautology, and we can conclude if you got the first or the second, you don't have the first, then you conclude the second, which is Q. So Q is going to go here. Again, it's valid, and again, because the tautology is going to be P or Q and not P, that's always going to imply Q, or you'll get a tautology in the last line when doing the truth table. Okay? So again, it fits one of the 4 valid on page 186. Again, it's valid. Oh, okay, we can conclude Q, and the tautology is P or Q, and not P will always imply Q. Okay? Very good. The fallacy of the converse has the form if P then Q. If you've got Q, you cannot conclude P. Again, this is the fallacy of the converse. On page 186, this follows one of the 4 invalid forms, okay? So it's a fallacy. So again, this, if they had another part here asking you whether this is valid or invalid, it's going to be invalid argument. So if it follows that form, it's one of the 4 invalid ones on page 186 of your textbook. Okay? So you can, so definitely that is invalid because it's a fallacy. Okay, now the fallacy of the inverse. Okay, so again, on page 186 of your text, this is one of the 4, it follows one of the 4 invalid forms. So this argument is invalid, so it's a fallacy, it's false. If you've got if P then Q, you're given not P, you cannot conclude not Q. If you have that form, then the argument is invalid, okay? Again, on page 186, it follows the form of one of the 4 invalid arguments, okay? Okay, you cannot conclude not Q. All right. Use a truth table to determine the following symbolic form of an argument is valid or invalid. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop at number 6. This is a truth table. Just, I don't want to run out of time. So we'll stop at number 6 on this session, okay? This is your math teacher, Dr. Swears. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you for listening to it. If you have more questions, send me an email using the inbox in the Canvas course through the FGCU portal. Again, thank you for listening to this video.